So I started going to the Broadway Club, which was actually located on Wendell Avenue back then, probably around the age of, I would say, 5, because I was definitely in elementary school, and I had remembered going to one of my friend's houses after school, and he dragged me over there. And the first thing I remembered was just that there was a calm feeling about it, which wasn't always true at home. So the looking back, it's to say that it was important is definitely an understatement. I made a comment on a LinkedIn post, and I think I captured it all when I said that it was a place where we could find warmth and comfort. And there were a couple of times that, we could eat there. There'd be little, meals every once in a while. You get a surprise, and it was great. I mean, it was, there was no class system. Everybody was poor. So what kind of value can you put on something like that? And there really isn't. So, for me now, thankfully I built a life for myself, and I didn't find the other side of the glass or anything like that. But it's one of the organizations that I feel really good about contributing to in any way that I can, because I know the resources will be used correctly and wisely. And you'll see the result. I can remember we had a pool tournament against the Mount Union Club, and I think it was the first time I was ever really on a team. And so I think there were 5 of us. And I can't remember how they picked the 5, if we were in different age groups or categories or what have you, but there were 5 of us. And we went to their club, which was neat. And I remember shooting pool, but it was a long time ago. But the thing that I remember the most was having another person cheer you on, like a teammate rooting for your, positive outcome. Usually when you play sports as a little kid, if you're shooting pool with somebody, it's you against the other kid. But it was really neat. And then in turn to cheer somebody else on. And then I remember we did win. And so, whatever the prize was, it didn't matter. We won, and it was cool. And I think I've really taken that with me throughout my life. I've never been, more than an average athlete or whatever, but I've always been a good teammate. I didn't know I was poor until I moved in with my grandparents into Maple Heights and saw that, wow, there's people that don't really have to make a choice between heat and electricity or heat and water. And, it was eye-opening. But, even after I moved away, from the time I was probably 9 years old to around 14, I still came back every weekend and still hung out at the club. I got sober in December of 2017, and I was giving my very first lead, they call it, where you stand up in front of a group and you tell them what life was like before, why you got sober, and what life is like now. And so I'm nervous. It's my first one, and where I was speaking was on the west side, and it's not really, a community that I'm familiar with. And they had brought in some buses of inmates to fill the room as well that were coming. So the room was packed. And so I think I spoke for about 4 minutes because I was nervous, and it was longer than that. But nonetheless, in what I was saying is I mentioned the bar where my mother worked on 55th and Broadway. It was called Chief's Tavern. And it was just one thing that I had mentioned in a long, litany of items. Well, afterwards, this gentleman comes over to me and he says, "What was the name of the bar again?" And I told him, and he says, "Do you remember me?" And well, we used to call him Skinny because he was the opposite. Well, now he really is skinny, so I didn't recognize him. But then when I heard his voice and I said, are you skinny? And he goes, "Yeah." And then we laughed. And I'm like, "You really are now, we got a big kick out of it." And he sent me a picture to my phone of he and I when we were little kids. And it was cool. I sent it to Ken, who's actually doing the interview right now. And I said, "Hey, there's 2 things I want to point out about this picture that are interesting." In it, I'm wearing a Euclid baseball Little League shirt. And I said, at that point in my life, I didn't probably know what a baseball was. I definitely never threw one, and I definitely never threw one while being in Euclid on some team. So you can infer that, that clothing was definitely donated. But also, I was sitting on Skinny's lap, who was at that point not skinny yet, and he had told me when we reconnected that he had done 8 years in a. He was present when somebody killed somebody, so he did a felonious assault. And the irony of it is, he's probably the least violent person I know. I think he was at wrong place, wrong time. But there was one thing we can count on in our neighborhood, and it's going to sound cliche. I'm not just saying it, but we knew. We went to the boys' club. Straight up, I mean, there were not a lot of positive male role models in our neighborhood. There weren't a lot of, and I'm not trying to take away from anybody that grew up there and had a dad or whatever, but in my world, there weren't a lot. And, I do remember seeing maybe for the first time what a good dude looked like. Somebody that was, sober consistently and clean consistently. And, you'll hear people say, why don't they ... Why don't they just, and fill in the blank, because they got the answers. But having, number one, grown up in the neighborhood where I did, which was no fault of my own, having met other kids that grew up in the same neighborhood, no fault of their own, and how many different paths that we took, you can only, you can bring the horses to water, but you can't make them drink, right? But for me, the way that that's impacted me is to know that it's important to show these kids, every kid, whether they're socioeconomically challenged or whether they're not, the right way, right? So for me, being empathetic to number one, to people's plight, where they are, their lot in life, whatever. It's not my place to judge where that is. But it is within my control to offer those people empathy and to show them that there is a better way.